On July 1, 1980, President Jimmy Carter sat down at his desk in the White House and signed a document that almost no one outside the trucking industry remembers today. It was called the Motor Carrier Act. It was 18 pages long, and the moment Carter put his signature on it, the paycheck of every truck driver in America began a slow 40-year collapse. Today, the average long-haul trucker earns dramatically less in real dollars than their grandfather did in 1979. Trucking companies have been built into billion-dollar empires. Walmart pays its private fleet drivers more than most engineers make. And every part of that story, the wealth, the wages, the collapse, traces back to one piece of paper signed in the summer of 1980. This is Big Rig Files, the story of how one federal law rewrote the American trucking industry, created Walmart's modern logistics empire, and left the working trucker holding the bag. To understand what 1980 changed, you have to understand what came before. For 45 years, American trucking was one of the most tightly controlled industries in the country. Under the Motor Carrier Act of 1935, the Interstate Commerce Commission controlled three things: who could legally operate as a trucking company, what routes they could run, and what rates they could charge. A common carrier certificate from the ICC was treated like property. They were bought, sold, and inherited. Some of them were worth millions of dollars. And the Teamsters Union, through its National Master Freight Agreement, locked in wages for the majority of over-the-road drivers in the country. A union trucker in 1979, adjusted for today's dollars, earned roughly the equivalent of $110,000 a year. They had a pension, they had health insurance, they had seniority, they had power. That was the world Carter inherited when he took office. By the late 1970s, the Carter administration had decided that world was the problem. Consumer prices were too high. Inflation was out of control. Economists across the political spectrum, including Senator Edward Kennedy on the Democratic side, argued that the ICC's price controls were strangling competition. The administration deregulated airlines in 1978. Trucking came next. The new Motor Carrier Act, signed July 1, 1980, did three things. It made it easy for new trucking companies to enter the market. It let carriers run almost any route they wanted, and it set rates free. The ICC's grip evaporated overnight, and the floodgates opened. The numbers from the decade that followed tell the entire story. In 1980, there were roughly 20,000 registered trucking companies in the United States. By the mid-2000s, that number had passed 200,000. By 2024, more than 500,000 carriers were operating. The driver population doubled from roughly 1.1 million in the late 70s to 1.9 million by the mid-90s. Competition exploded, freight rates plummeted, and so did wages. Economist Michael Belzer of Wayne State University spent a decade studying what happened next. His findings, published in the book Sweatshops on Wheels, were devastating. Real inflation-adjusted earnings for non-union truckers fell by roughly 30 to 40% in the 2 decades after deregulation. The Teamsters, who had covered the majority of long-haul drivers in 1979, watched their membership in trucking collapse. Non-union carriers like J.B. Hunt and Schneider National, built specifically for the new deregulated landscape, grew into giants. The unionized companies that had defined the old era began to die. And that brings us to August 2nd, 2023. On that morning, Yellow Corporation, once the largest unionized less-than-truckload carrier in America, a company with roots going back to 1924, announced it was shutting down. Roughly 30,000 employees lost their jobs in a single weekend. Yellow had taken a $700 million emergency loan from the U.S. Treasury during COVID in July of 2020. The Treasury became Yellow's largest creditor. When the company finally folded 3 years later, the federal government was first in line to be paid back from the auction of Yellow's terminals and trucks. The collapse made the U.S. taxpayer the largest beneficiary of a unionized trucking company's death. It was the obituary for an industry that had effectively been dying since 1980. But here is where the story takes a turn most coverage misses. Because deregulation didn't kill good trucking jobs. It killed the system that made them widespread. A handful of companies, the ones rich enough to internalize their own logistics, simply built private versions of what the unions used to provide. Walmart is the example everyone in the industry watches. As of December 2025, Walmart Transportation operates roughly 9,000 trucks and employs about 13,000 drivers. Starting pay is around $115,000 a year. Drivers are trained in-house through a 12-week program that recruits directly from Walmart's own store associates. Roughly 1,000 store workers had graduated into driver roles by late 2025. The result is a fleet where about 18% of drivers are women, nearly double the industry average. Drivers stay for decades. Turnover is a fraction of the industry's 90% rate at large long-haul carriers. Walmart's drivers, by every measurable standard, have the job that the average American trucker had in 1979. The catch is that almost no one else gets it. To replicate Walmart's model, a company has to be large enough to control its own freight, sophisticated enough to manage its own logistics, and willing to spend on labor what its competitors won't. Almost nobody is. And so the modern American trucking industry runs on two tracks. A small upper tier of private fleets paying old economy wages, and a vast lower tier of independent contractors, port drayage drivers, and small carrier truckers, earning less in real dollars than their grandfathers did. That is the legacy of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. Lower freight prices for every American consumer, a $1 trillion logistics economy, and a driver workforce that has been quietly losing ground for 46 straight years. The next time you pass a semi on the interstate, understand what you are looking at. The cargo in that trailer costs less than it would have in 1979. The driver behind the wheel earns less too. One number went down so the other could. That trade was made on a Tuesday in July of 1980, and we have all been living inside it ever since. If this look behind the scenes of American trucking added something to your week, hit subscribe. There are more files in the cabinet, and we are just getting started.